The Divine Arsonist, A Tale of Awakening. Written and read by the author, Jacob Nordby. Chapter 7. The next several days were a tedious blur. I buried myself in work and tried to pretend that I was not rattled by the events of the previous weekend. I met with clients, answered phone calls, checked my email, and returned voicemail messages. I was doing it all like a joyless robot, going through the motions. The conversations with Lucius and later with Mike had opened some sort of window. Now, like a prisoner who smells fresh air and freedom for the first time in many years, I was miserable in my accustomed routine. Until today, the pressures and difficulties of my work just seemed like part of the entrepreneurial trade-off. When you captain a ship, sometimes there's a storm. Pretty simple. Stressful but normal. Just table stakes to play in the big game. Not anymore, though. I felt like Jonathan Swift's character, Gulliver. I was trapped and tied down by a million tiny ropes. I felt restricted and imprisoned by the very structures that I had helped to create. Even more troublesome, I could not imagine a scenario that would cut me loose without also capsizing the ship for everyone on it. My metaphors were being scrambled, but I didn't care. My partners were preoccupied with their own business. They didn't seem to notice the way I withdrew from the social flow inside the office. Sheila tried to corner me a few times and drilled down for an explanation, but I was evasive and always found a way to change the subject. Evenings at home provided no refuge from my irritated restlessness either. I would sit at the dinner table and force a smile while my family chattered about school and video games and the toys they wanted for Christmas. "It's only 2.5 months away, Dad," Nathan would say. I would rally and nod, pretending that I was engaged in the conversation. At night, after the children were tucked in, Jennifer would talk about the small dramas going on between her friends and travel plans for the holidays. I made an effort to emit interested noises and keep the appropriate facial expression, but it was often futile. My mind would sneak away to open the closets of shadowy questions that I didn't want to acknowledge. "Are you even listening to me?" she said on Wednesday night as we sat in bed. My head jerked as my eyes refocused on my wife's face. She looked a little irritated. "Huh? Oh, I'm sorry. I think I must be getting sleepy," I said. She shook her head with frustration, made comical by the large curlers she had rolled into her hair. I must have grinned, and this further exacerbated the situation. "What, you're laughing at me?" The slippery slope appeared before me. I was never very good at avoiding this kind of thing. Hey, what's going on?" I said, and reached over to caress her back. She moved her shoulder away from my hand. "You've been ignoring me all week," she said. "Tonight I'm trying to ask about it, and now you think it's funny." "I'm sorry, I really didn't hear that part." "Yeah," she said, "I noticed. I said that you've been acting like you're on a different planet for a few days. What's going on?" Surely this isn't the time and place to spill the Lucius story, I thought. I stalled. Answer a question with a question. "How do you mean, a different planet?" She sighed with frustration. "How many ways could I mean that? You've been distant and moody. You come home from work and barely say a word all evening. You've been grinding your teeth and muttering in your sleep." "Oh, that planet." I glanced over at Jennifer. She was sitting with her arms crossed in the universal spousal symbol of discontent. My reply must have sounded flippant. That strategy never seemed to work out well, but I had often tried it just the same. "I've had a lot to think about," I said. "Things have been complicated." "Complicated how?" she said. This seemed promising. Her demeanor had softened and turned a bit sympathetic. She had turned her head and was looking at me full on. Do I take the plunge now? I breathed in deep and let it out slowly. Where should I start? "Something happened up at the cabin," I began. Her eyebrows drew together in the first stages of alarm. I told her the story in sketch form first. She needed to know more, so I answered her questions as best I could. After the basic shape of the whole picture had emerged, we both fell silent for a while. Jennifer looked thoughtful. A few seconds passed. She reached for my hand and held it. "So, what are you going to do?" she asked. Well, ask me again this time tomorrow and you might get a different answer. Right now I keep vacillating between yes and hell no, I must be crazy. A clever thought occurred to me then. What do you think I should do? I mean, you're affected by this in a big way. She raised her eyes until they met mine directly. Suddenly, tears sprang up and spilled over her eyelashes. Her face crumpled, and she bent her head. I think you know this has to be your decision, she said. Her voice was thick with a sob she was working to suppress. I leaned over and folded her in my arms. Her whole body convulsed, and she struggled to regain composure. I stroked her hair, and she pushed her forehead down against my shoulder. It's all right, I said. I felt the same way all week long. A couple of minutes passed, and she pulled away from me and sat straight. She used the edge of the sheet to wipe her eyes. I don't know what to think about this. You've never done anything really strange before, so it's hard to imagine that you're making it up. It's just so weird. I know, I said. If I hadn't personally experienced all of it, there's no way I'd believe me either. It all happened, though. That's what keeps pushing me to take this step into thin air. I have an internal something that tells me I've been waiting my whole life for this. As Lucius hinted, it feels like I'm finally keeping an appointment I don't remember making, but it's right there on my calendar all the same. Tell me again, what's the grand plan behind all this? Why now, and why did he pick you? Well, he kept saying, you need to discover who you really are. He said that the world is approaching a time of crisis, that a lot of us are being sort of awakened or activated or something. Honestly, I get a little fuzzy on the exact wording he used, but the general feeling is that some people are ready to wake up and discover their purpose for being here. He said that I am stuck, in fact, that almost all human beings are. Apparently, those of us who pay attention to this call will add our awareness to a rising tide. He said it was kind of like inertia or momentum. Once the ball gets rolling, things will start moving a lot faster. People will start getting unstuck all over the place, and the world we live in will change. To heal. That sounds kind of crazy, I said. Well, yeah. I know. Believe me, I know how it sounds. So, what are you going to do? I feel, even more now that I've told you about it, that I better go see what this is about. I guess I can always hit the stop button if things get too bizarre. Even as I said words meant to comfort my wife, I knew that the gears of fate were again grinding into motion. There would be no emergency brake to pull after I left town for my meeting with Lucius in a few days. She must have felt this too, because her eyes welled up with tears again, and she just nodded silently. We didn't talk more that night. We turned off the lights and lay awake with our backs to each other while the growing questions between us hovered over our bed like dark shadows. Back in my office on Thursday morning, I had a quiet conference with Sheila to set the stage for my leave of absence. She was very competent, and I had several junior consultants who could handle the clients I would normally see. She was to ride herd on them and try to maintain the equilibrium until I came back. The added responsibility didn't seem to intimidate her. If anything, she'd probably run things more efficiently without me around to muddy the waters. I didn't tell her the story, just claimed a bad case of burnout. She had already planted that seed, so it wasn't much of a stretch. The big hurdle for me was to break the news to my partners. I had rehearsed and revised my explanation to them a dozen times. It still didn't feel very convincing. The trouble was that even without the excuse of a strange summons from the universe, I just didn't take a break very often. I wasn't sure they were going to believe me when I said that I needed some unexpected time off. My conversation with Mike kept replaying itself in my head. What was the last thing he said? Oh, right. Maybe, just maybe, it's time you figured out that other people can make it without you. Your playing God in everyone's life might not be good for you or for them. Playing God? I don't do that. I know better. Well, I do like to help people. It makes me feel important and it makes them happy. I like to make sure that people are happy and cared for. That's not wrong. You can have anything in life you want if you help enough other people get what they want, right? I looked around my office. Could they really make it without me? A tumble of panic started up inside my ribcage, and I wondered if the fear originated in concern for the people who depended upon me, or was it some deeper dread attached to part of me I couldn't see? If all went according to plan, I would not come back in the next day, so I felt obligated to leave my office in some degree of order. I had decided to spend Friday with my wife and children. As if to punish this indulgence, the phone kept ringing and email notifications constantly popped up on my screen as I plowed through the stacks on my desk. I ignored the interruptions, although the glowing red voicemail light on the back of the handset reminded me that I was an indispensable gear in our operation. Remarkably, I was angered by this obligation. This was new. Usually I responded with enthusiasm when people needed me. Today, though, my mind sifted back through years of recorded messages. Call me ASAP. I need to hear something from you. Jacob, if this doesn't happen on time. On and on and on. The messages were all urgent and important. I held people's happiness and comfort in my hands. It was all personal to me. I suddenly got this image of myself like the picture on the front of the DVD case for the movie Office Space. I was a man smothered in yellow sticky notes. Every one of them cemented to my soul with superglue. Each of them carried an urgent demand for my attention, and they were all slowly sucking my life dry. It didn't seem to matter how diligently I handled every single issue. In that brief moment, I knew with certainty that I was drowning in a never-ending river of duty to people who would forget I even existed as soon as we finished with their transaction. Somehow, in my passion for extraordinary service, I had conjured a flood of needs that threatened to suffocate me. I shook my head. Need to focus. Where's all this negativity coming from? After working a few hours, I looked around and was pleased to see a clean desk. For the moment, every pressing situation was handled. My email box was clean. I had set an auto-response directing people to Sheila while I was absent. My voicemail greeting said, "Thanks for calling. You've reached Jacob. Please listen carefully. I will be out of the office and unavailable for a while. Don't leave a message here. Press 0 and ask for Sheila. She'll answer your questions or schedule a consultation. Thanks again, and make it a great day." Make it a great day. That was my signature voicemail farewell. It had been for years. It was strange to hear myself say that I would be out of the office and unavailable. With the exception of a couple of long weekend getaways with Jennifer, I had always been available all the time for longer than I could really remember. Bob Dylan's voice whispered inside my head. How does it feel to be on your own? No direction home. Like a complete unknown. Like a rolling stone. An Outlook calendar event appeared on my screen with a little chiming sound. Subject line, Partner Meeting, Conference Room. Ready or not, it was time. I was first in the conference room. I took my usual chair at the head of the long table and arranged my bottle of water and a pen in front of me like a shield and sword. I glanced around the room. It was a beautiful space, and seeing it again brought back a rush of memories. Our office building was an expression of my vision for the company as a whole. The very fact that we were finally able to build it had been a major milestone. In one corner stood the shovel we used at a small groundbreaking party. I had a picture hanging somewhere of our whole gang standing out in the cold, holding up plastic goblets of champagne while I chipped out a frozen divot of dirt. High times. The conference room ceiling was coffered with hand-polished knotty alder timbers that gleamed in the soft light. This was the boardroom where I was delighted to hold meetings. It was a rare person who was not impressed. I designed it that way. This is your stage on which to play. Use it to create a memorable experience for your clients. That was my mantra when I tried to infuse the staff with my passion. The door opened and my two partners came in. They were busy, finishing phone calls, tapping out text messages, deep in their own work. Finally they found a seat, and a moment of silence reigned. All eyes on me. I looked around. These were my friends and comrades at arms. We had started the company a few years before with $20,000 of my saved cash and a couple of their credit cards. I was the Pied Piper and Chief Imagination Officer, but these fine people had helped me hammer out every key decision. I spun the dream wheel, and then we all put boots on the ground to execute the plan. We had taken a serious leap of faith to build this office. It was multiple times larger than the first small space we rented. We had been solidly profitable in our first location. It had been my idea to go for it, to get aggressive and ramp up the operation. The way I read the future for the next 5 years, we should take advantage of the booming real estate market to build a company envied by competitors and loved by clients. Reality had been much less kind. Just as we moved into our exquisite new space, the market reached its frothy top and started to subside. We had difficulty attracting the top salespeople my plan called for, and our revenue projections were in a constant state of revision. I took responsibility for this and found myself toiling under feelings of failure and stress. My golden dream had turned into a salt mine. No matter, though, I was strong and capable. This was all just a test of my resolve. All my books and teachers said so. Just keep going. Never give up. John fidgeted his pen and cleared his throat. Time to get this party started. Thanks for joining me, I said. They nodded, waiting. I wasn't sure how to start. Ask a question, make conversation. How's everything going? I looked at them each in turn. Their eyes asked questions. They shifted in the leather chairs. John spoke first. He was always the most direct. Everything's fine, but I have a lot to do. What's this about? Time to dive in. Guys, this isn't like me, but I need a little time off. I'm going to leave tomorrow and be gone for a while. I wanted to give a plausible explanation, but there wasn't much else to say. Without telling the whole preposterous tale of my previous weekend, I didn't have a good excuse. No way that I could paint the full surreal picture for them. They already thought that I was a wild-eyed dreamer at times. David's eyes shot up and he leaned forward. You're what? I think I need some time to catch my breath or something. They looked at each other and then down at the table. Awkward. Is there anything we need to know about this? John said. David's phone buzzed and he silenced it impatiently with a slap at the buttons. He shook his head. Jacob, we're all tired here. Things are pretty intense right now. How long are we talking? Acid boiled in my stomach. This was exactly what I hated to do. Any time I needed something for myself, I felt guilty, like a little boy begging for a favor. It wasn't fair. My face burned and my heart pounded. When I replied, it was louder than I intended. I'm not sure, David. I hate to be a burden, but I'm sort of processing things at the moment. I need some time away to get through it. John's face looked tight. Anything we can do to help you process whatever it is? We kind of need you back at full capacity as soon as possible, he said sarcastically. Look, I said, this is unusual. I'm aware that none of us has had a real break for the last couple of years. That's not good. We can't exactly afford vacations right now, David broke in. We need all hands on deck if we're going to make it. I know we can't, believe me, I know. I've got Sheila lined up to take care of my work for a little while, and I'm confident everything will keep moving just fine. How long are we talking for this break? A few days? A few weeks? John said. Honestly, this is the hard part, I thought. I don't know. They shook their heads, disgusted, and I could see jaw muscles clenching down on words they wanted to say. I once read that nonverbal cues and body language make up 70% of communication. Theirs were particularly eloquent. Crossed arms, contracted faces. I hurried to explain further. I know this isn't my usual mode. I'm sorry to inconvenience you guys. I'll be back in the saddle as soon as possible. We all sat in uncomfortable silence. No one made eye contact. The meeting was clearly at an end when they pushed their chairs back and started for the door. John turned before he left the room and looked back. Do you suppose you'll be able to join us for the meeting with the bank next week? He said. It's kind of important if we're going to stay afloat. There was a brittle edge in his voice. He could not seem to believe that we were having this conversation. John, I hope so, I said. I just don't know. He pulled the door closed, and I was alone, sitting in the thundering silence. My breath rushed out, and I fell forward to rest my forehead on the table between my arms. Am I really doing this? Back in my office, I felt light. I had slashed through most of my self-created tether. It was time to pack up and go. I looked around. My desk was tidy. The trash can was empty. I loaded my laptop into its leather case, swung the strap up on my shoulder, and turned to the door. Still need to do something. What? I put the computer bag down and stood there taking inventory. Keys in my pocket, cell phone in my hand, wallet. Check. I turned my head and looked around for a clue. My walls sported nicely framed success posters. Dare to soar, one said. It had the picture of a bald eagle gliding through a blue sky. Right above my desk there was my vision board. I created it after being inspired by watching The Secret movie. It had pictures of the finest things in life: big houses, luxury cars, sandy beach, Rolex watch. In the center I had pasted a picture of my family. Above and to the left were the cut-out words freedom and time. There were pictures from a health magazine, a well-muscled torso with the words Radiant Health glued above it. Interesting. Some of the things had come into my life, but they had pushed out the less tangible ones. I had the house and car, but the debts that accompanied them had made radiant health and time with my family seem like distant goals. I was overweight and stressed and running ragged. Maybe Lucius will help me figure out this puzzle, I thought. This train of thought triggered my memory. Books. Lucius said to bring books. I stepped over to the bookcase and surveyed the titles. I started reading success literature as a young teenager. Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, Napoleon Hill, Charlie Tremendous Jones. I had quite a collection. Tony Robbins, James Allen, Jim Collins, Dale Carnegie. Some old, some new. I ran my fingertips over the spines of my friends. The ideas contained in these books had formed the foundation of my resolve to create the life of my dreams. Which ones will Lucius approve of, I wondered. I pulled Brian Tracy's The Psychology of Achievement, Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, and See You at the Top by Zig Ziglar in a pile. So many great books. They had all been influential. I like to think of the men and women who wrote them as my teachers. I put the small stack under my arm and turned to leave. Just then the dark DVD case of The Secret caught my eye. I wedged it on top of the others. It had bridged the gap and delved into the spiritual metaphysical side of success. Sheila appeared at the door just as I was leaving. "Hey, you out now?" I nodded. "I'll walk you to your car." I had decided to leave without any fanfare. No need to alarm the staff or fabricate an explanation for my sales team. Sheila would just let them know that I was going away for a while on a well-deserved vacation. We left through the kitchen and walked out to the patio. The sun was shining, but a chilly wind blew down from the mountains. Sheila stopped and wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "Well, I really hope you get some rest," she said. "Thank you, Sheila. I can't say how much I appreciate you stepping up like this for me." She smiled, then reached one arm and squeezed me around the shoulders. "Just get yourself sorted out and don't worry about us here. Everything will be all right, even with the chief away." I patted her on the back with my free hand, then moved toward the car. "See you later," she called after me. I smiled and waved. She couldn't see that sudden relief had exploded inside me. I felt buoyant and excited about my decision for the first time. As I turned my steering wheel, I glanced at the image in the rearview mirror. My building appeared to be on fire, engulfed in a blaze of flames so bright that it hurt my eyes. I blinked and looked again. The impression vanished, and what remained was the ordinary scene of a small office park. That's weird. Must have been a trick of the sunlight. So why did the now familiar silent gong send a vibrating crash through my body at that moment? Boom, shee. On Friday, Jennifer had everyone up and dressed by 8:30. She had called the school and our children were going to skip a day so we could spend it together. We started with a big breakfast downtown at Moon's Cafe. Our table was a glorious riot of sticky donuts, biscuits and gravy, and hot chocolate with whipped cream. We held a vote and decided to watch an early screening of a new 3D movie in the big multiplex. The whole day went like that, one good thing after another. We laughed and ate and bickered a little. In the late afternoon, everyone was exhausted. On a whim after lunch, we had driven the winding road up to Bogus Basin. We hiked as far up the snowless ski hill as possible before the twins mutinied and threatened to die rather than take another step. The view was spectacular from our vantage point at 6,900 feet. Far off, beyond the city that sprawled in the valley, the Owyhee Mountains spread across the horizon to the west. We took turns finding landmarks. The air down below was smudgy with pollution, but the wind blew clean and cold in our faces as we sat perched on top of the world. On the way back home later, warm silence reigned. Everyone was quietly absorbed in his or her own thoughts, but we felt connected and peaceful. I kept turning to look at my family. These few, slow moments were golden, and I was conscious that my journey into the unknown might well disrupt this comfortable picture. We came to a stop inside the garage. 3 seconds of perfect stillness passed before everyone roused and the car became the eye of a noisy hurricane. As soon as we were inside the house, the children vanished into their various dens of entertainment, and Jennifer stood with me in the quiet entryway. She smiled at me in the half-light, and I reached to help her with her coat. As she turned to slip from the sleeves, her body brushed against mine. Our eyes met with the silent understanding that comes from years of marriage. Her arms went around my neck, and I pressed her tight to me. She radiated soft, inviting warmth. I kissed the smooth skin behind her ear, and she nodded against my neck. We hurried up the stairs to our bedroom and locked the door. While she undressed, I turned on quiet music and lit the flame in the gas fireplace that was her only demand for the master suite when we built the house. The firelight glowed and created an intimate envelope of warmth that welcomed us as she walked across the room and stepped into my arms. She made love to me with an unusual urgency, and afterward she turned away and wrapped the sheet around herself. I placed my palm against her back and felt her body shaking. I moved close and touched her face. My fingers came away wet with tears. I pressed my forehead against the back of her neck and shook my head. What is going to happen to us? I wondered.